I always thought we had the perfect life. My name is John, and my wife Alice and I have been married for 15 years. We lived in a beautiful suburban home in the quiet town of Greenfield. We both had stable jobs. I worked as an engineer at a local firm, while Alice was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Our life was simple, just the two of us, and we were comfortable. We had our routines, our shared jokes, and our plans for the future. Our house was modest but cozy. Alice had a knack for decorating, turning our home into a warm and inviting space. The kitchen, with its light blue cabinets and vintage appliances, was her pride and joy. She loved to cook, and weekends often found us trying new recipes, laughing over our attempts at gourmet meals. Our living room was filled with soft, plush furniture, perfect for lazy Sunday afternoons spent watching movies or reading. We didn't have kids, a choice we made early on. We loved our freedom, our spontaneous weekend getaways, and the quiet evenings we spent together. It was just us, and it worked. At least I thought it did. Greenfield was a small town where everyone knew each other, the kind of place where neighbors waved hello and local shopkeepers knew your name. It was a peaceful, idyllic life, or so it seemed. Looking back, I realize now that I had been living in a bubble, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to shatter my world. Our marriage had its ups and downs like any other. We argued about silly things, the proper way to load the dishwasher, whose turn it was to take out the trash. But we always made up. Or at least, I thought we did. Alice was the love of my life, my rock, and my best friend. I never imagined she could be anything else. The first hints that something was wrong came subtly. Alice had always been a bit high-strung, but lately her mood swings were more pronounced. One minute she was cheerful, the next she was snapping at me for the smallest things. I chalked it up to stress from her job. Nursing wasn't easy, and the long hours were taking their toll on her. Or so I believed. I first noticed a change when Alice started spending more time on her phone. She'd laugh at messages, quickly type out replies, and then put her phone down with a satisfied smile. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off, saying it was just work friends. But something didn't feel right. Her phone was always on silent, and she never left it unattended. Then came the late nights. Alice began working overtime, or so she said. She'd leave the house dressed up more than usual, wearing makeup and perfume that she never bothered with before. When I'd question her, she'd snap back defensively, accusing me of being paranoid and controlling. I hated the tension, so I backed off, but the unease lingered. Weekends, which were once our sacred time together, started changing too. Alice began making excuses to go out alone, claiming she needed some me time. I wanted to trust her, to give her the space she needed, but the nagging doubt in the back of my mind grew stronger with each passing day. One Saturday, she told me she was meeting an old friend for lunch. She left the house looking stunning, her smile brighter than usual. I watched her drive away, a strange feeling of dread settling in my stomach. That afternoon, I decided to clean up the house to distract myself. While tidying up our bedroom, I found a receipt for a dinner for two at an expensive restaurant in a neighboring town. The date on the receipt didn't match any night she was supposed to be working late. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she had a work meeting there, or she was treating a friend. But as the days went by, more little things started to add up. She'd come home late, smelling of alcohol and a cologne that wasn't mine. Her clothes, often rumpled and out of place, added to my suspicions. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted her gently, asking if everything was okay, if there was something she wanted to talk about. Alice looked at me with such annoyance, her eyes narrowing. "John, you're overreacting. You're being ridiculous," she snapped, turning away from me. Her dismissal only fueled my anxiety. I began to watch her more closely, noting every late-night text, every unexplained outing. I felt like a stranger in my own home, my trust in the woman I loved eroding with each passing day. My suspicions grew, but without concrete evidence, I was left in a state of constant doubt and paranoia. The woman who had once been my confidant and partner now felt like a distant, secretive stranger. The thought of Alice being unfaithful gnawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it fully. Not yet. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Alice had told me she was working late again, a frequent occurrence lately. I decided to surprise her with dinner at her hospital, hoping to rekindle some warmth between us. I packed her favorite meal, a gesture that felt painfully reminiscent of better days. When I arrived at the hospital, I was greeted by one of Alice's colleagues, Claire. She looked puzzled when I mentioned Alice working late. "Alice isn't on the schedule tonight, John," she said, her brow furrowed. "She left hours ago." A cold chill ran down my spine. I forced a smile and thanked Claire, but inside my heart was racing. If she wasn't here, where was she? I drove home, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I decided to call her, but she didn't answer. I texted, asking when she'd be home, and received a curt reply. "Don't wait up." I couldn't sit still. The house felt suffocating, filled with the ghost of my suspicions. Desperate for answers, I decided to check her computer. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but my need for the truth outweighed my guilt. Opening her laptop, I found her email account still logged in. My hands shook as I navigated to her inbox. At first, it seemed normal. Work emails, spam, newsletters. But then I saw a thread from someone named Richard. My heart sank as I read the subject lines. "Last night. Missing you. Our secret." I clicked on the emails and my world shattered. The exchanges between Alice and Richard were explicit, filled with declarations of desire and plans for secret rendezvous. He was her boss, the head surgeon at the hospital. The man I had met several times, who had always seemed so professional and distant. The most recent email, sent just that afternoon, confirmed my worst fears. They had booked a room at a hotel downtown, the same night she was supposedly working late. The email contained details that left no room for doubt about what was happening there. My vision blurred with rage and betrayal. The woman I loved, the life we had built together, it all felt like a cruel joke. I couldn't stay in the house, surrounded by memories that now felt tainted. Grabbing my keys, I drove to the hotel, my mind a storm of emotions. When I arrived, I parked across the street, staring at the hotel entrance. I didn't know what I would do if I saw them, but I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. After what felt like an eternity, I saw them. Alice and Richard, walking out together, his arm around her waist, both laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. They didn't see me. I watched them get into his car and drive away, my heart pounding in my chest. The sight of them together, so casual in their betrayal, was the final confirmation I needed. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had shattered my trust. I drove back home, feeling numb. I didn't know what to do next, how to confront her. The evidence was undeniable, but the emotional impact was overwhelming. I spent the night on the couch, my mind replaying the scenes over and over, unable to escape the reality of Alice's infidelity. By the time she came home, it was nearly dawn. She walked in quietly, probably thinking I was asleep. But I was wide awake, waiting. As she tiptoed into the living room, our eyes met, and she froze. "John," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "I know everything, Alice. I know about you and Richard." Her face went pale and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence between us was deafening, filled with the weight of her betrayal and my shattered trust. Alice stood there, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. I could see her trying to formulate some kind of response, but nothing could explain away what I had discovered. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until I couldn't take it anymore. "How long, Alice?" I demanded, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "How long have you been screwing him behind my back?" She flinched at my words, her face crumpling. "John, it's not what you think," she stammered, taking a step towards me. "Please, let me explain." I laughed bitterly. "Explain? You want to explain why you were in a hotel with your boss, instead of working late at the hospital? You think there's anything you can say that will make this okay?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I was too hurt, too angry to care. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "It started out as just a friendship. We were both stressed, and one thing led to another. But it doesn't mean I don't love you." "Love?" I spat, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You call this love? Sneaking around, lying to me, sleeping with someone else? That's not love, Alice. That's betrayal." She reached out to touch me, but I recoiled. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't you dare try to touch me. You've lost that right." Her tears flowed freely now, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I had spent so many nights wondering, worrying, trying to make sense of her behavior, and now I had my answer. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I had ever imagined. "I was lonely, John," she sobbed. "You were always working, always busy. Richard was there for me when you weren't. He listened, he cared. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." "Don't you dare put this on me," I snapped. "I've been working to provide for us, for our future. I trusted you, Alice. I believed in you, and this is how you repay me." She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I still love you. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No," I interrupted, my voice cold. "There is no fixing this. You destroyed our marriage the moment you decided to sleep with him. There's no coming back from that." The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in with the weight of her betrayal. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. Couldn't bear to hear her excuses. "I want you to pack your things and leave," I said, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "I can't do this anymore." "John, please," she pleaded, but I turned away, my heart breaking all over again. "Just go," I said quietly. "Get out of my sight." She stood there for a moment, sobbing, before she finally turned and walked towards the bedroom. I heard her moving around, packing her belongings, but I didn't follow. I couldn't. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. When she finally left, the silence that filled the house was deafening. The woman I had loved, the life we had built together, it was all gone. All that remained was the painful reality of her betrayal. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never be able to look at Alice the same way again. The love I had for her was tainted, poisoned by her infidelity. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to move on, to find a way to rebuild my life without her. In the days that followed, my emotions were a whirlwind. Anger, betrayal, sadness, all swirling around, consuming me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and everywhere I looked I saw reminders of Alice. The house felt empty, haunted by the ghost of our past life together. I couldn't just let this go. I needed to do something, to take back control of my life. The anger was the worst of it, a burning, relentless fury that demanded action. I couldn't let Alice and Richard get away with this. They had destroyed everything I held dear, and they needed to pay. I began to plan my revenge. It wasn't enough to simply move on. I needed them to feel the same pain I was feeling. I needed to expose their betrayal for everyone to see. First, I gathered all the evidence I could. The emails, the messages, the photos, all the proof of their affair. I compiled everything into a detailed dossier, making sure no detail was left out. The more I uncovered, the more my resolve hardened. Next, I set my sights on Richard. He was a respected figure at the hospital, admired by his colleagues and trusted by his patients. His reputation was impeccable, and I knew exactly how to destroy it. One evening, I sat down at my computer and began crafting a series of anonymous emails. I sent them to the hospital board, to his colleagues, and to the local press. I included all the evidence I had gathered, detailing their affair in explicit detail. I knew it would create a scandal, that it would tarnish his image beyond repair. Then I turned my attention to Alice. I needed to confront her one last time, to make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. I waited until I knew she would be at home, and then I called her. "John, please," she said when she answered, her voice filled with desperation. "Can we just talk? Can we try to work things out?" "There's nothing to work out," I replied coldly. "But there are some things you need to know." I told her about the emails, about how I had exposed their affair to everyone who mattered. Her silence was deafening, and I could almost hear her mind racing as she processed what I had done. You did what?" she finally stammered, her voice shaking. "You heard me," I said. "Everyone knows, Alice. Your friends, your colleagues, even your family. I made sure they all know the truth about what you've done." She began to cry, but I felt no sympathy. "How could you do this?" she sobbed. "You've ruined my life." "No, Alice," I said quietly. "You ruined your own life the moment you decided to betray me." The phone call ended with her sobbing and pleading, but I didn't listen. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds, but it was a start. The fallout was swift and brutal. Richard was suspended from the hospital pending an investigation. His colleagues shunned him, and the press hounded him relentlessly. Alice's friends turned their backs on her, disgusted by her actions. Her family, once so supportive, now looked at her with disdain. Alice called me several times, begging for forgiveness, pleading for another chance. But there was no going back. The trust had been shattered, and there was no way to rebuild it. The revenge brought a measure of satisfaction, but it didn't erase the pain. I still had to face the reality of my broken marriage, the emptiness of my home, the future I had to rebuild from scratch. But knowing that they were suffering, that they were paying for their betrayal, gave me the strength to start moving forward. In the end, revenge didn't heal my wounds, but it gave me the closure I needed. I could finally start to let go, to focus on my own recovery, and to begin the difficult process of finding a new path forward. The aftermath of my revenge left a trail of destruction. Richard's career was in shambles, his reputation irreparably damaged. Alice was ostracized by her friends and family, left to face the consequences of her actions alone. It was a bitter victory, but it gave me the closure I needed to move on. However, there was still one final conversation I needed to have with Alice. A few weeks after the fallout, Alice reached out to me, asking if we could meet. Reluctantly, I agreed. We chose a neutral place, a small park where we used to go during happier times. I arrived early, sitting on a bench, watching the children play and the couples walk by, feeling a pang of loss for the life I once had. Alice arrived, looking tired and defeated. She sat down beside me, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and regret. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "John," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. I've lost everything, my job, my friends, my family. But the worst part is losing you." I looked at her, my heart heavy. "You didn't just lose me, Alice. You destroyed everything we had. I trusted you, I loved you, and you betrayed me in the worst way possible." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded. "I know. I was selfish, and I made terrible choices. I thought I could find happiness with Richard, but it was all a lie. I've realized too late what I threw away." "Why, Alice?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you do it? Wasn't I enough?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It wasn't about you, John. It was about me. I felt lost and empty, and instead of talking to you, I sought solace in someone else. It was a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake." We sat there in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to find a way to move past the pain, but the wounds were too deep, the trust too broken. "I can't forgive you, Alice," I said finally, my voice steady. "What you did destroyed our marriage. There's no going back from that, but I hope you can find a way to heal and learn from this." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry, and that I will spend the rest of my life regretting what I did." We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. Finally, I stood up, ready to leave the past behind. "Goodbye, Alice," I said, looking down at her one last time. "Goodbye, John," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. As I walked away, I felt a sense of finality, a closing of a chapter that had brought so much pain. It was time to focus on my own healing, to rebuild my life without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. Alice and I had shared many memories, both good and bad, but it was clear that our paths were meant to diverge. The last conversation was a step towards my own recovery, a necessary confrontation that allowed me to begin moving forward. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The legal process was long and grueling. The divorce proceedings dragged on, each step a painful reminder of what had been lost. Alice and I communicated only through our lawyers, avoiding any direct contact. It was easier that way, less painful. The trial itself became a battleground, each of us fighting for what remained of our shared life. My lawyer, Mr. Davis, was a calm and methodical man, guiding me through each step of the process. He assured me that we had a strong case for both the divorce and the financial settlement, given the evidence of Alice's infidelity. We were aiming for a fair division of our assets, and most importantly, I wanted to ensure that I retained ownership of our house. It was the last piece of stability in my life, and I couldn't bear to lose it. Alice's lawyer, on the other hand, was aggressive. They contested every point, making the process as difficult as possible. Alice seemed determined to fight for everything, perhaps out of spite, perhaps out of a desperate need to hold on to something familiar. It was hard to tell. Each court session was a bitter reminder of the person she had become. In the courtroom, we sat on opposite sides, avoiding eye contact. It was surreal, seeing the woman I had once loved now as an adversary. The proceedings were a blur of legal jargon and testimonies, each side presenting their case. My evidence of Alice's affair played a crucial role, tipping the scales in my favor. The day of the final judgment arrived, a day I had both dreaded and eagerly anticipated. The judge reviewed all the evidence, listened to both sides, and finally delivered the verdict. The divorce was granted on the grounds of Alice's infidelity. The assets were to be divided fairly, but the house was awarded to me, a decision that brought a sense of relief and stability amidst the turmoil. Alice looked devastated as the judgment was read out. She had lost the battle, and the reality of her actions had finally caught up with her. There was no more fighting, no more accusations, just the cold, hard truth of the consequences she had brought upon herself. After the trial, I walked out of the courtroom, feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a hollow sense of victory. The marriage was officially over. A chapter of my life closed forever. I drove home, the house that was now legally mine, and sat in the living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The divorce trial had been a necessary step towards closure, a painful yet essential process to sever the ties that had once bound us. It was a harsh lesson in betrayal and resilience, teaching me the importance of trust and the strength to rebuild from the ashes. That evening, I walked through each room of the house, memories flooding back with every step, the laughter, the arguments, the dreams we had shared, all now part of a past that I needed to let go of. I knew it would take time to heal, to truly move on, but the trial had given me a sense of finality, a clear path to start anew. As I stood in the doorway of what had once been our bedroom, I made a silent promise to myself, to rebuild, to find happiness again, and to never let betrayal define my future. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with strength and determination. The trial was over, but my new life was just beginning. The trial's conclusion marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The house was now mine, a solitary fortress where I could start rebuilding. The days that followed were a mix of grief and tentative hope. There was a strange sense of peace in the silence, a relief in knowing that the worst was behind me. But the path to healing was long, and I was determined to face it head-on. I began by making changes around the house. I repainted the walls, changed the furniture layout, and created a space that felt like mine. It was a therapeutic process, each stroke of paint, and each new piece of furniture symbolized a step towards reclaiming my life. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects and challenges. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the drive to move forward. It was an escape, a way to fill the void left by Alice's betrayal. But I knew work alone couldn't heal the wounds. I needed to reconnect with the world, to rediscover who I was outside of the failed marriage. I started by reaching out to old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. Their support was a balm to my wounded heart. We met for coffee, went on hikes, and talked about everything under the sun. They helped me see that life goes on, that there is still joy to be found despite the pain. One of my friends, Mark, suggested I try therapy. At first, I was hesitant, but I knew I needed help to process everything that had happened. I found a therapist, Dr. Ellis, who specialized in dealing with betrayal and loss. Our sessions were intense, digging deep into my emotions, but they were also incredibly healing. Dr. Ellis helped me understand that it was okay to feel pain, that it was part of the healing process. As months went by, I started to explore new interests and hobbies. I took up photography, capturing the beauty of the world through my lens. It was a way to see things differently, to focus on the positive. I joined a local photography club, meeting people who shared my passion. Their enthusiasm was contagious, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of excitement. Through the club, I met Emily. She was a fellow photographer with a keen eye for detail and a warm, infectious smile. We started talking, sharing stories of our lives and our love for photography. There was an ease in our conversations, a connection that felt natural and unforced. Emily was understanding and patient, aware of the scars I carried. She didn't push for more than I was ready to give, but her presence was a comforting reminder that there was life beyond the pain. One evening after a club meeting, we went for a walk in the park. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. We sat on a bench, watching the world go by, and she turned to me, her eyes filled with kindness. "John, you've been through so much," she said softly. "But you're still here, still standing. That takes incredible strength." Her words touched something deep inside me. For so long, I had felt weak, broken by Alice's betrayal. But Emily saw something else in me, something I hadn't recognized in myself. "Thank you," I replied, my voice filled with gratitude. "I guess I just take it one day at a time." She smiled, taking my hand in hers. "That's all any of us can do." Our relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding. Emily became a source of joy in my life, a reminder that I was capable of love and happiness again. She was patient, giving me the space I needed to heal, while also encouraging me to embrace the future. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain of the past began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism for what lay ahead. I had learned so much from the ordeal, about trust, resilience, and the importance of self-worth. Alice's betrayal had shattered me, but it had also forged a new strength within me, a determination to never settle for less than I deserved. One day, as I stood on the porch of my newly decorated home watching the sun rise, I realized I had come full circle. The house, once a symbol of my broken marriage, was now a testament to my resilience and new beginnings. I had faced the darkest parts of my life and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Emily joined me, wrapping her arms around me as we watched the sunrise together. "What's next for you, John?" she asked, her voice filled with warmth. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. "Whatever comes," I replied. "I'm ready for it." And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed it. The journey had been painful and difficult, but it had also led me to a place of healing and hope. I was no longer defined by Alice's betrayal. I was John, a man who had faced heartbreak and come out the other side stronger, ready to embrace a future filled with promise.